Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof, the curator of the Dissenter Newsletter. This is the Dissenter Weekly, and welcome to this week's broadcast. It is August 19th, and these are whistleblower stories from the past week, some that we're following, some that I covered over at the Dissenter Newsletter. And again, just at the top of this show, I want to send you over to this URL. I want to make sure that you're a subscriber. And I also want to make certain that you're hitting the subscribe button on the Shadowproof channel so that you can know when we go live and we do these broadcasts, and also when we're posting videos. I'm doing a little more posting of videos as of late from the unauthorized disclosure podcast that I co-host with Rania Kalik, as well as some other clips that I'm doing. So let's get rolling with this week's show. And unfortunately, my colleague Brian Sonnenstein isn't here to help shepherd me through this. I often have him in the background helping me play video clips. We've got a few video clips today, so I'll have to fumble and bumble my way through them. But I think I can manage to do it. So this first story is an international story. It's from Corruption Watch. It's about whistleblower complaints that have come in over the last 8 years. Corruption Watch in South Africa is a non-governmental organization in South Africa that was launched by the Congress of South African Trade Unions in 2012. And they put out a report on whistleblowing complaints. Since that year, they received over 5,000 complaints related to local government corruption, with the sharpest spike during the COVID-19 global crisis. They say that nepotism, bribery, and disregard for the law, for policies and laws, are common. Whistleblowers allege companies in the city of Cape Town, it's a very popular tourist town, are encouraged to bill the municipality double the amount owed for services. One city called Ekurhuleni has traffic officers who scam tourists into making large payments if they are stopped. Related to housing, whistleblowers reveal that details involving long waiting lists for people in need of subsidized housing. So we've got corruption around people who are in need of places to live. A person can be moved down the list if they don't pay bribes. Also, quote, male officials attempt to extort sex from female beneficiaries, end quote. There are public officials who are selling plots of land to businesses or private persons for financial gain. So we have all of this documented. And for those who are more interested in the way that these different areas of South Africa have this corruption that's being exposed by whistleblowers, you can see there's a lot of extreme detail where they go district by district, mapping out where they are receiving complaints from. But in the report, Corruption Watch concludes, thankfully, we have the voices of thousands of brave whistleblowers who live in these hardships and who have witnessed the injustices brought about the insatiable greed for power and money. Their accounts tell the stories of communities throughout the length and breadth of this country, and thus afford us all the opportunity to give meaning to accountability in our pursuit for social justice and leadership that is corruption-free, ethical, and imbued with integrity. So, amen to all of that. That's from South Africa. Our next story, and again, thank you all for tuning in. Hello to you, Random Jack. Thanks for stopping by this broadcast. So the next story here is that the UK government's COVID app pinged thousands to isolate for no reason. This is coming from The Guardian, but an incredible story here, one with great risk because you need people during the pandemic to believe that what they're being asked to do is legitimate. And when they have no reason to believe, or when they have reason to doubt that the government is making requests of them for their supposed safety, and it turns out they didn't need to take these precautions, I think it's hard to win them back. So the standard definition of a contact in all the scientific and public stuff from Public Health England and NHS Test and Trace is someone who has been in contact from 2 days before they have symptoms. If they don't have symptoms but test positive, you go back 2 days from the test. But there's an app that the UK has been relying on, which a whistleblower says had 5 days programmed into it. What that means is people who came into contact with these people who were COVID-19 positive within the last 5 days were being told to isolate, were being notified that there were risks, that they needed to quarantine. But it should have been 2 days. It never should have been 5 days. And so you have a shadow health minister named Justin Matters in this Guardian story saying this is another shambolic situation from hapless ministers, and adding that the COVID app has been one mess after another, and a lack of clear information and guidance around the app only undermines its effectiveness. The whistleblower's account has mostly not been challenged by anyone, it would seem, in the British government. So it seems like this really is that much of a screw up. And you have Al Gaff, a chief operating officer of the privacy campaigning organization known as the Open Rights Group, saying that this will undermine the public's trust because they can't protect people's privacy. The disclosure, this whistleblower complaint, means many thousands of people have been pinged by the COVID app without their consent. Since the outset of the pandemic, this government has displayed an extremely poor and cavalier attitude toward basic privacy and transparency safeguards. The government needs to stop turning public health tools into privacy nightmares and public health risks. So we have this story, and one that I think, given the way it's been executed, leaves people wondering why they should comply with orders to quarantine, because what if they're invalid? So the next thing on our list for today is the EPA scientists within the division of the EPA who are involved in the putting together of chemical risk assessments. This is something that we have been following with this show. There have been stories published by The Intercept, by Sharon Lerner, a journalist, and then we've been following the public employees for environmental responsibility, and the press releases and the statements and the filings that they've been putting out, calling attention to what's going on, how this division, this chemicals division, the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, is entirely captured by corporations that have industry interests in undermining the completion of these safety assessments. And they're disrupting and obstructing the ability of scientists to do their work. And what we learn is, in the last couple of weeks, that there's managers who are being prevented from communicating with their colleagues while they are putting together these assessments. So they have 90 days to complete their assessments. You have supervisors who are forbidding them from communicating with other specialists. Scientists are saying that they've been reprimanded for reaching out to other employees for advice and confirmation of their work. And what we see here from public employees for environmental responsibility is that this is a critical problem, since there's not sufficient staff trained in every specialty, that specialists need to be able to fill in knowledge gaps by consulting other people, And so the executive director says that forbidding consultation is an abusive practice which compromises the scientific integrity of chemical assessments and prevents accurate hazard information from being completely reflected to the ultimate detriment of worker and public safety. That's from peer executive director Tim Whitehouse. We've not really seen much on the part of the Biden administration in response to remedying this problem. It's unclear what's going to be done, but peer's been putting out some extensive information. We've had at least a half dozen or so whistleblowers, scientists, or people within the division come forward now and mention that there are these hazardous chemicals that should be regulated, that there should be warnings put out with them. But you've got corporations that are managing to completely undermine the ability of any of these chemicals to be regulated the way that they're supposed to be regulated. And we'll move on to the next story here. What we've got is a story about drone whistleblower Brandon Bryant, who overcame a political case. This is a story that I posted to the Dissenter.org. Let me just move over here. I'll give you all a look at this in case you want to go find it yourself. You can go to the Dissenter.org and let me scroll up to the top here. We can show you a picture here of Brandon. But this story unfolded in Montana back in the first week of July. We had this story unfold, and Brandon Bryant is a drone whistleblower. He's someone who was outspoken under President Barack Obama. He was involved in drone sensor technology, working with the drone sensor technology. And he was put on trial in a political case where the city of Missoula, or a prosecutor in Missoula, Montana, this is where Brandon lives, accused him of threatening city council officials and doing so during a public comment session, the public comment portion of a city council meeting. And it's an incredible story, a deeply and highly political case, the way it came about being pursued against Brandon. They treated him like he was a military veteran who was about to fly off the handle and possibly do violence against someone without any basis whatsoever. He's protesting tax increment financing, or the way the city has a slush fund that doles out money mostly to private corporations and wealthy individuals who don't need the assistance. And it ends up being the case that people who do need it end up being deprived of funding for resources and services that should be funded. So you see the diversion of funds to these wealthy and powerful interests through TIFs. And so he was protesting the poverty that he's seen since he returned from his deployment and being involved in the U.S. military. And he said he spoke and was eventually thrown out of the chamber because he raised his voice. The way he was speaking led to his being asked to leave the city council meeting. You had city council officials who were Googling his name instead of listening to what he had to say. And ultimately, they come across this video from his private YouTube channel that was only made available to his subscribers. It's not even actually that video, though. It's a video clip that took pieces of his own YouTube video and cut it together to make it seem like he was saying that he was going to exterminate people. And that's how the city council took it, that this might be something where he was coming for them, although he never named the city council or he never said anything directly. But there was a part where he used the word exterminate. So a person who is a stalker of Brandon Bryant who does not like what he's done as a drone whistleblower or is jealous of him as a drone whistleblower, came after Brandon and put this video on his page and has consistently been coming after Brandon. And someone on the city council found this video or had this video sent to them, and they decided that Brandon was a threat, and he faced this political prosecution that stretched from the early part of 2020 all the way through to when they had the trial in July. He was under bail conditions, but he also had to raise about $10,000 or come up with $10,000 so he could be bailed out of jail and not be in jail waiting for his trial. And he would have been in jail during a pandemic if he didn't come up with this bail money. They didn't let him travel anywhere. Of course, he's at home and restricted in what he can do. And I give a lot of detail in the story that I posted over at the Dissenter. I talked to his mother, Lan and Brandon about this and what they think it might mean for the future. I mean, it does seem like, for one, he was probably an easy target because he's so outspoken about drones. I think they maybe thought that they could go after him. I think the people who are on the city council who are sick and tired of Brandon Bryant and people like Brandon Bryant are Democrats who, see these people as nuisances and they wanted to do something to remove them. And so they thought this might be a way to contain someone who has some kind of status in the city. But ultimately, it didn't work because Brandon Bryant testified during his trial. He had a defense attorney well-versed in the First Amendment who was able to expose what the prosecutor was doing. The jury saw through. There were countless character attacks attempted, lots of projection, people in the city council projecting their own fears and insecurities onto this case in order to help the prosecutor, in order to, use this case to their advantage to nail Brandon. It all fell apart, fortunately, for Brandon Bryant, and he triumphed, and he tells me about how good it felt to triumph. It was something he felt was a culmination of a long, drawn-out process, basically a saga that had been leading up to this moment. It included his whistleblowing. It included everything that's gone on in his time in Missoula since he returned from being part of the military. And, finally he got to have this confrontation in a public or a government setting, and he was able to lay it all out there. And his defense attorney was able to cross-examine him and ask him about why he blew the whistle and ask him about why he did what he did, ask him about why he goes to city council meetings. And I am concerned that this kind of thing is going to continue to happen. It does seem like a legacy of the Trump administration that, we don't want people to be able to come and confront public officials. They're using the language of, I guess, it's kind of like a counterinsurgency type language to suggest that anyone who might do this and be confrontational could be a kind of threat. I don't think they want people there in city council. And so for Brandon to prevail, I think we probably will see other cases like this. I don't know that they'll be as notable or noteworthy as Brandon's case, but this shows that the city council and other prosecutors, if they want to try this, you can win. You don't have to submit to what they're doing. You don't have to plead out. You don't have to fear them. If they have no basis for proving that you have threatened them, then you should stand by being there and protesting policies. And you shouldn't let their Googling of you be something that intimidates or allows you to give into their harassment. And I think that's the lesson from Brandon Bryant, having experienced, targeting from intelligence agencies as a drone whistleblower. He comes back to Missoula, and then he's targeted by his local government that would claim to support veterans, except they don't support veterans who speak out against their city council, apparently. But he got the Missoula mayor on his side. He got some other city council members on his side, and he was able to demonstrate that this was just entirely bogus, and there was no reason for this prosecutor to be able to pursue him. So if you want more details, I haven't gotten into all the specifics, but you can go to thedissenter.org, get that full story. I did talk to Brandon. I talked to his mother, and it turned out to be a really good story. I'm glad I was able to publish it at the Dissenter. So now I'll go to another thing that I worked on this past week and highlight as we're moving through this show. And thank you to those who have tuned in. Thanks for liking, and be sure to share this clip if you appreciate what we're sharing here, what you're hearing here about whistleblowers. We have been tuning in to what's unfolding in Afghanistan as a nation. The U.S., many people watching as the Taliban took over Kabul, as the United States is trying to get people out of the country, and as it becomes clear that it was fundamentally botched. But then the debate is over what happened. Why is it botched? Well, it was botched because the Pentagon didn't want to withdraw U.S. military forces from Afghanistan. And if you listen to whistleblowers, if you listen to those who have protested the Afghanistan war, then it's not a mystery. It's not a shock that we're seeing this calamity play out. You wouldn't be as stunned to know that the Taliban is taking over, and the government that we instilled, or that we helped institute, just fell over like a literal house of cards fell over. And people like Matthew Ho, have pointed out that over the last 18 months, the Pentagon had all this time to prepare for a withdrawal of forces, and they didn't want to. They were hoping that Donald Trump would not want to continue with this withdrawal after the election. And they were possibly counting on persuading Joe Biden to keep the U.S. military forces. The withdrawal date was May 1st. They had this agreement with the Taliban. It's not a really good agreement for Afghan people, for the people of Afghanistan. It hands the country over to the Taliban, but it was an agreement to end the Afghanistan war, which was something that's crucial after 20 years. And you have those that, we should have been elevating more. We have a corporate media. We have a media that is owned, supremely influenced by the military-industrial complex. There was one example over the past week was that Politico posted a story about the Afghanistan war that was sponsored by Lockheed Martin. So you have these, you have this incredible failure by our media, but also a resistance to covering these people who have dissented over the last years. And I go through them. I do a story over at the Dissenter about the people who had warned us of how the war was going, what the reality was on the ground. And I do put it in a terms of winning and losing. I put it in terms of the fact that people from within the military and within the political establishment were warning that we could not win the Afghanistan war. And the reason I put it that way is because I think it tells you a lot about how this is all unraveled and why I am apprehensive and why we should be fearful about what comes next for the people of Afghanistan. They're not going to let the Taliban rule Afghanistan without interfering with them and making lives even worse for the people of Afghanistan. They're freezing assets. They're sanctioning already. The CIA seems to have some plan, at least a faction of the CIA, maybe people within the country still seem to have some plan. They want to support and back the son of Ahmed Massoud, who was a Mujahideen fighter who did receive support from the State Department, as well as had benefited from some support from the CIA, although there seems to be some kind of a rivalry that took place between him and another warlord when he was fighting the Soviet Union. So we see that they're going to have a public face for resistance to the Taliban, and they're going to go the route that they did with Juan Guaido in Venezuela. And we see how far that's gotten. We see just how the people have coalesced around Juan Guaido to say, get the fuck out of here, basically. And I don't know what's going to happen with this son, but he's someone who went to London in the mid-2010s. He was at the Royal Military Academy. He received an education at a couple universities there. And then only in the last 3 or 4 years has he been back and living in Afghanistan. And this is what happens. These people who, go off on their own, and then they make links with Western intelligence agencies or Western military agencies or Western institutions, then they come back to their countries and they want to be revolutionaries that can benefit from U.S. support, and hopefully they are catapulted into positions of power. And he's using the legacy of his father as a fighter to try and entice people into supporting his campaign. I don't think it's going to be that successful, but you've got columnists like the Washington Post published a column by him. You've got people within the media who want to boost him as an alternative to the Taliban and help the CIA, this faction. I don't know if it's the entire CIA or just a faction within the CIA, help them promote propaganda around what this individual could do to form an alliance against the Taliban. So this isn't going to help the Afghanistan people. It's going to provoke a greater civil war. It's going to undermine any efforts by people to have reconciliation and form some kind of an agreement for a power sharing in a government. And, there are warlords that the U.S. backed who may not go along with the Taliban. So these whistleblowers who we should have listened to, they're people like Chelsea Manning. They're people like Daniel Hale, who is in prison right now. There's Julian Assange, who is a journalist and published Chelsea Manning's documents and spoke up. And there's Daniel Davis, who's a whistleblower who spoke out about the Afghanistan war and did so around 9 to 10 years ago, came forward and shared what he was seeing on the ground. Matthew Ho, who I mentioned already. And I consider Barbara Lee, who was in Congress, to be kind of whistleblower herself, but not really in a traditional sense, not really in the way that most people would think, but someone who tried to pump the brakes and warn the Congress on what was to come, and at great risk to herself at a time right after the September 11th attacks, saying that she wasn't going to vote for an indefinite authorization of force, use of military force for the Bush administration to go forward and have this open-ended bombing campaign in Afghanistan as the answer to the September 11th attacks. And she was the only one in the House of Representatives who voted against it. And she stands as a person of conscience still to this day on Afghanistan. And others have come around to her, but there were only ever a few dozen representatives out of 400 plus people in the House of Representatives who ever backed the withdrawal of forces. So I'll play a clip. I want to play a clip here of just someone lesser known. This that I'm going to play is it's Daniel Davis, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis. And this is him at a hearing February 2020. And in February 2020, this is about the time that Donald Trump was, his negotiators were having those meetings with the Taliban over the agreement that would be hammered out for the withdrawal of U.S. military forces. And so this is Daniel Davis, and what you'll see is he's being asked a question by Senator Mike Lee. So we'll go ahead and play this clip for you.
What is the objective in Afghanistan? I'm not sure I know anymore.
Yes, sir. There, in the initial, you were dead right. President Bush gave an absolutely militarily attainable mission in October of 2001. It was absolutely correct. It was something we could do. We had the military capability to do, which was to defeat the Taliban and to degrade the Al-Qaeda's ability to conduct operations against the United States. Those were absolutely accomplished 100% by about, maybe as late as this next summer. So by 2002, then we should have returned because there was no military mission left to accomplish. We absolutely annihilated the Taliban. We didn't just defeat them. So at that time, there was no military foe left to keep our troops there for. Many people often claim that, when Bush went to Iraq, he took his eye off the ball and that's what caused the problem. No, there was no ball to keep your eye on for a number of years after that. We should have retired, but President Bush then and President Obama deepened later on, changed the mission to a nation building, which cannot be accomplished with military forces.
Hence the self-licking ice cream cone metaphor.
Yes, sir. There is, to answer the next part of your question, there is no strategy right now. None. There's no strategy that, if you accomplish A, B, and C, the war will be over. Nothing like that exists. We're merely conducting operations with no objective.
So if that's the case, Colonel, at what point do we say, okay, that's it, this war is over, it's time to go home? Or is this indeed an indefinite conflict? A war in perpetuity.
We should absolutely do it right now, because every day that goes forth, you're going to have more men like those who were murdered over the weekend for no good. Everybody says they're heroes and all this stuff, but sir, we have to be honest and say they lost their lives for nothing. They didn't defend American democracy. They didn't secure our safety. They were just killed because we won't shut the war down, and we just keep going. And that just grieves me more than I can even explain to you, sir.
That's Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, someone who came forward, an establishment voice, technically speaking, somebody who we should have listened to. Imagine if we could have all rallied to his cause and listened to him. So I'll continue on and conclude with the regular Julian Assange update that we do. Obviously, following this case closely, we've got the appeal hearing scheduled for the end of October, and Julian Assange has been out there. He's been floating around because of the fact that people found this clip of him at a rally in 2011 discussing Afghanistan war. And so maybe you've seen that going around. But I want to show you this clip here that went viral some days ago, but I didn't get a chance to share my views about it. So I just need to. All right. So we've got it queued up. So this is a press briefing with the State Department. And there's an important point that I've been making about the Biden administration, and it's illustrated by this exchange that you see happen, this infuriating back and forth between journalists from the Associated Press. His name is Matthew Lee, and then you've got Ned Price, who is, the most impotent flack that you could trot out to represent the government. Will just lay there or sit there I mean, is just like a vertical bunch of human goop just standing there saying the most unsubstantive, worthless kinds of things when asked questions. And it's his job. I mean, he's doing it well. You're basically paid to stand up there and look like a doofus, but this is what this is the clip. And like I said, this went and was shared pretty widely, but I haven't had a chance to comment on it. So we'll play this here.
On the administration's commitment to democracy, human rights, which I think includes freedom of the press and your support for that. I just wanted to ask really quickly about the situation with Julian Assange in London, the court hearing that was held today. And if you're only going to refer to the Justice Department, then I don't need to hear a long explanation of that. But what I want to know is from the State Department's point of view, because it was studies that were among the first that were compromised, quote unquote. You have an interest, and the State Department has an interest in this case, and so I'm just wondering if it is still the position of the State Department that Assange is not a journalist and that he should be tried for theft of what you would essentially say are state secrets.
Matt, by referring to the Department of Justice, as we always do in cases like this, it doesn't indicate we don't have an interest. It indicates that we have a respect for the separation of institutions and the independence of our Department of Justice.
The position of this administration, since it came in talking about how important the freedom of press is, hasn't impacted the department's position in this case. Is that correct?
This is a matter before the Department of Justice. It's a matter the Department of Justice is
not a matter
pursuing.
before the department.
Okay, so what we're hearing from Matthew Lee is an important point, that the State Department stands before the world and makes pronouncements about press freedom on a consistent basis. And that does not match up with the way the U.S. is mounting and continues to mount this political prosecution against Julian Assange for the publication of documents. And so they need to be confronted. Someone needs to ask them about this hypocrisy or the lack of consistency. They need to say, why do you have this prosecution unfolding, yet at the same time you're lecturing other countries on press freedom, that you're pressing human rights, you're saying that you want authoritarian countries to protect journalists? And how do you think that's treated as credible when Julian Assange is in Belmarsh prison and you continue to go after him for the publication of secret documents that were once in the custody of the United States? They lost control. They did not protect the security of these documents. And so that's a problem, obviously. I know it's embarrassing. The whole world's got to read these. And also there was a huge public benefit to them. But journalism was done. Awards were given. Julian Assange was well within his rights as a journalist to do this work, and yet the U.S. is still targeting him. So, Ned, you have the floor. Try to say something that is more than the buffoonish crap that you are shoveling at us.
Department of Justice is a matter before the British courts, but I just want to know if your position, the State Department's position, that you represent to the Department of Justice, who then represents you, has changed at all.
Matt, the Department of Justice is pursuing this. I will leave it to them to pursue and to characterize the United States government's position on this.
Okay, so the State Department's position hasn't changed, correct?
Matt, the Department of Justice is speaking for the United States in a
know,
law enforcement matter.
Why can't you give straight answers? Yes or no? Has it changed or not over the course of the last?
The Department of Justice in this matter.
I am fully aware, Ned.
Matt, you don't need to be combative. Okay, you don't need to be combative. I know you like to get worked up, but please,
I'm not trying to get worked up.
It's a simple matter that's before the Department of Justice.
Fine. All right. So in terms,
look at this shithead. Just laugh. Look at the smirk. Look at this. Look at this. He thinks this is funny. He thinks this is like a laugh a minute for him. This is a serious matter. What's the State Department's policy on prosecuting journalists? What is it, Ned? Tell us what the policy is. This is not like we shouldn't be playing 21 questions or 20 questions to try to figure out what is the State Department's position on the prosecution of Julian Assange. And you wouldn't have been playing this when Donald Trump was in office, because those guys weren't cowards. They didn't hide. They were very proud to be prosecuting Julian Assange. We knew their position, and they would answer a question like this. And then they would probably let Matthew Lee try to square the fact that they are telling other countries what to do with their journalists while this prosecution is unfolding. And they would allow it to be illustrated that there's a difference in treatment, that they don't think Julian Assange is a journalist, but then they think that other places need to protect journalists. And we would have a conversation with all the information, with everything out in the open, and seeing quite clearly the authoritarianism of President Donald Trump's administration. But they're conscious, they know exactly what they're doing, and they don't want us to talk about it, and they think that we're going to not talk about it if they don't answer questions that are given to them. They think that somehow this helps keep attention away from their public position on the case, which is to act like it's not happening. It's, to pretend like this isn't unfolding. It's, and they spent the last 4 years, these groups of people talking about Trump gaslighting. Look at what they're doing. There's an actual gaslighting of an AP journalist into making it out that there's no position that the State Department has towards WikiLeaks or the prosecution of Julian Assange. There's just no way that, if State Department even complied with Freedom of Information Act requests, they're one of the worst agencies when it comes to trying to get records. But what you would find is, I'm sure, they have opposition within the State Department to WikiLeaks. They tell certain activists and groups to steer clear of WikiLeaks over the last decade. They don't want human rights organizations to support Julian Assange. They don't want to fund or give money to anyone who's aligned with a group like WikiLeaks, an organization like WikiLeaks, or who speak out for Julian Assange. That's that people who want pro-democracy funding, so to speak, in these countries in different regions in Middle East and Northern Africa, the parts of Central and Southern Africa, in Asia. Anybody, though, who's caught showing solidarity with Julian Assange will be put on a blacklist and probably not supported by the State Department. But this guy thinks it's hilarious that Matthew Lee is getting worked up over this issue.
In terms of your grand promotion of democracy, human rights, which are going to be at the center of U.S. foreign policy, as we'll see, no doubt, in December when the president hosts his summit for democracy. How does that relate exactly to Afghanistan?
Okay, so we're on to something else. We're on to something else entirely, where there is still more hypocrisy. But you get it. You get it that they're two-faced, they're cowards. The Biden administration won't answer for what's unfolding. They would pretend like it's not happening. And it's up to us. It's up to journalists to keep asking the questions. It's up to people who are activists to have those confrontations. Anyone who has the ability to privately question these elected representatives, people within the Justice Department, especially Attorney General Merrick Garland, anyone in the Biden White House, keep raising this issue. Get them to answer the question, the critical question, the critical question of, if you claim to support press freedom, if you claim to support human rights, how can you continue the prosecution of Julian Assange? And then underneath that, the follow-up question of, if you want other countries to protect press freedom and uphold human rights, how can you press onward with the prosecution of Julian Assange? It's simple. We don't need to belabor this. We don't need to keep going on, but we only go on and on for as long as the Biden administration keeps resisting being basically decent people. And also, if you're not going to be decent, at least have the guts to say it right to the public and defend it. You know, like, they're getting a lot of backlash right now for the way they handled the withdrawal of U.S. military forces from Afghanistan. But Biden is defending it. Biden's administration is saying this is what needed to happen, that forces had to come out of Afghanistan. It was time to leave. They believe in that policy. It's not popular. They're getting backlash from Democrats. They're getting backlash from Republicans. I think most of United States citizens actually support leaving Afghanistan. That's been something that people wanted for at least the last several years. But they know there's opposition to prosecuting Assange, and they're hiding, and they're being cowards. So that's it for this week's show. And I'm glad that you were able to tune in. Thank you for watching. And this is the Dissenter.org, the newsletter where you can go become a subscriber if you are not a subscriber already. Become a paid subscriber if you are able to afford it, and fund journalism on whistleblowers. We have an accountability crisis. You see it very glaringly with the Afghanistan war. You see it when it comes to what's happening with the Justice Department and Julian Assange. You know, a few people early on in the Trump administration, when he was indicted, were grumbling to the Washington Post and maybe a couple other outlets, and it seemed like there was dissent. But now it's part of the everyday at the Justice Department, and nobody says anything. We need whistleblowers to come forward. We need people who are writing stories, and we need the journalism that gives space and support to them as they take the risks, because there are a lot of risks involved in being a whistleblower, especially under the United States government. So that's it for this show. I am glad to be able to talk with you every week, and we'll be here next week for another edition of the Dissenter Weekly. Until then, see you around.